Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the last panel of the day. Really grateful to everyone for sticking around. Yeah, hope you've had a good day. It's been a lot, I think, a lot of great conversations. It feels like fitting, I suppose, to end on a bit of a reflective panel. This year, we've marked 5 years since medical cannabis has been legal in the UK. This week, we've been marked 5 years. So this feels like a good opportunity to sort of reflect on where we've come so far, but also look forward to where we want to be and where we should be. Only 5 patients have been issued unlicensed cannabis medicines through the NHS in comparison to 140,000 private prescriptions. So it's clear that the expectations of what would happen when the law changed haven't been the reality. However, this year we have seen 2 adult patients have their prescriptions reimbursed through the NHS. I know Mike Roberts was online earlier, sort of sharing his experience. So it can be done, but there just isn't a clear pathway at the moment. So I'm going to start by asking us to sort of reflect on the last 5 years, but I also want to, use this as an opportunity to discuss what we've heard today, if anything's come up. I think all of the panels have really sort of tied into each other, and there's a lot of common themes throughout them, and really we're just talking about more or less the same issues. So yeah, feel free to kind of reflect on what we've heard so far today as well. I'm joined by Adrian Brearey, who's the manager at Teesside Cannabis Club, an Exhale Harm Reduction Centre. Dr. Luisa Searle, who's a cannabis prescriber and associate medical director at the Georgia Emerson Centre. Dr. Helen Beckett Wilson is a senior lecturer and researcher at Liverpool John Moores University. And her current project with Dr. Lindsay Metcalf McGrath was, I don't know if you saw the little video at the beginning of the day, but that was their work that went into creating that. And Rowan Thompson is a medical student and a medical cannabis patient. So I'm going to just come to all of you for a very quick introduction, and then we'll kind of dive into some questions. So Adrian. Yeah,
Adrian, Teesside Cannabis Club and Exhale Harm Reduction Centre. We campaign for safe access for all users, from medical users to recreational users, and we have a safe consumption zone, which is Teesside Cannabis Club in Stockton.
Hi, my name's Dr. Luisa Searle. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, so I deal mainly with mental health and treat people with medical cannabis for their mental health disorders. I also have a subspecialty of substance misuse, so I kind of bring my 2 hats when I'm prescribing medical cannabis, and I've been prescribing medical cannabis now for about 3 years, I would say.
I'm Dr. Helen Beckett Wilson from Liverpool John Moores University, and as Sarah said, myself and my colleague Lindsay, we have been conducting research from a sociological perspective. We work for the Centre for the Study of Crime, Criminalisation and Social Exclusion, and so we come at this from a sociological perspective of looking at the social injustices produced by the health inequalities of current drug policy and the issues around prescribing cannabis.
Sorry guys, could we just say, can you bring your mics a little bit closer to you? Because when we've got to turn them up, that's when the feedback starts happening.
Yes, hello there, I'm Rowan Thompson. I'm finally a medical student at the University of Birmingham. I'm not actually a medical cannabis patient. No, that's quite all right. My background is from industry. I used to work for a company called Hydrotops, who make hydroponic nutrients. So I had quite a bit of involvement indirectly with the legacy market through that. In more recent years now, I work with the MCCS, and I do a lot of focus on student outreach and trying to revolutionise and kickstart medical education around medical cannabis to target clinicians early on in their training to change the culture around medical cannabis within healthcare.
Brilliant, thank you. Apologies, Rowan. As a sort of medical student, I guess, where did your sort of interest in this stem from, and how did you find yourself in this field, and sort of reflecting on the progress so far, how do you feel about where we are?
So I come from the slightly unique position of having, before being a medical student, worked in the industrial sector and had that link to cannabis through that. I don't feel if I'd just become a medical student I would have ever developed an interest in medical cannabis, because it's not something that's really talked about in our medical school. So our doctors of the future are not routinely being taught around medical cannabis. There's some very interesting figures from North America where this has obviously been going on a little bit longer, where they've actually looked at the training and education in doctors. And I believe it's only 9% of American medical students actually feel they receive any proper education on medical cannabis as part of their studies, and 80% of American pharmacy students would like to receive education on medical cannabis. So I think one of the things that really motivates me about medical cannabis is wanting people to be able to have the opportunity to learn more about it. So when they become exposed to it later on in their clinical lives, seeing patients as doctors who want to talk to them about medical cannabis. So I know many of you do, you want to go and talk to your GP about medical cannabis, you want them to have a degree of understanding or at least empathy to listen to you. My hope is that by targeting these doctors during their training, during the early parts of their careers, when they get approached by a patient who wants to talk about medical cannabis, they won't immediately shut it down, they will be willing to listen to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Helen, just to speak to the sort of wider patient experience, and we saw some of your findings in the video this morning, but what was the kind of overarching things that came from that research of what the patient experience is in the UK?
I think probably to start at the beginning, the study came as a result of frustration, of our frustration. The story began with Lindsay, who herself, as a social scientist, has got someone in her family who is a cannabis patient who had to go through the hell that a lot of you have described for today. So that was the sort of beginning of a conversation. I've been lecturing on the evils of drug policy for many, many years now. And so that conversation was how it started. And what we wanted to know was what was the experience from a sociological perspective of people going through this injustice and these health inequalities. And the frustration, of course, has mounted much further when we started to speak to the amazing people that we talked to who shared their stories. Those findings that you saw on the screen this morning, every single one of those findings comes from somebody's life. And the things that we heard about, there's kind of two stages to the problems that are happening. There's the problems that you've got leading up to trying to get a cannabis prescription. And if you manage to get one, the things that you are then having to negotiate as a person who has been prescribed the drug, from the perspective of stigma, from the perspective of being not allowed to exercise your rights as a free individual and move around freely with your medication on your person. All of those things come together to form quite two very frustrated women who want to do something about it.
Amazing, yeah. And Adrian, a lot of your members are medical users, whether they have a sort of legal prescription or not. What are some of the concerns that they have about the state of things at the moment? And do you think that they're sort of prevented from accessing a prescription for various reasons?
Yeah, a lot of them will be in the mindset that they're not eligible. A lot of them don't want to follow the route because of their background and the struggle that they've had with the system previously. People are coming around to the idea, and it's again educating some of the members that they are actually using it as a medical product rather than just recreational, or the stress at the end of the day that they're dealing with is also a medical condition. It's just getting more and more of them into the system again. We're using referrals through different clinics and things like that, and it's about awareness as well, and getting people to recognise it's not harmful, or it's not as harmful as what it's been educated previously. And then we've got people who come and they're literally desperate for help. And we're happy to help them. This is one of the things that we need to do. More consumption zones, more recognition, more awareness as well. That's the only way that we can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think sort of NHS access is sort of a fundamental thing for them? Is the sort of cost of a prescription something that holds it back?
Definitely cost. That's the main concern for a lot of people. They don't want to pay these extra consultation fees, these extra additional. if some of our members know people who grow it, know people who can access it, so why would they go through a system that they don't trust? And then obviously we've had irradiated flour that's come through the system as well. So it again negates that trust that they've had for it, where they know somebody who's been growing it all their life, and it's like, can you help me? And it's like, well, yeah, if you need that, then yeah, that's what. It makes it a lot easier and less of a thought process for them. But yeah, we do need them in the medical system as well. And it's rights, again, they don't understand that this is their right, and they should be outraged really by the way that this has been underplayed throughout the years, I think. It's a start, but we've got a long way to go.
Absolutely, yeah. And Luisa, as a prescriber and a doctor, why do you think we've seen so few prescriptions on the NHS?
I think it has a lot to do with essentially like regulation around treatment models. And I mean, at the moment, I can't go and look in the BNF, so the British National Formulary. It has all the drugs that we can prescribe in this country. I can't look up medical cannabis in the forms that our patients are most likely to access it, so in the flower form. And I can't see, some rules and some formulations to follow to allow me to prescribe safely and to feel comfortable as a prescriber to prescribe this type of medication. So until we have that kind of system that doctors who are a bit on the fence or a bit sceptical can kind of understand, and until it moves from unlicensed into licensed territory as well, so there's something quite anxiety-provoking, I think, for medical professionals when it's when they see this thing as unlicensed, whereas actually we already have well-established treatment paradigms for unlicensed medication, in that pretty much most children in the country are treated with unlicensed medication. We adjust the formulations based on their weight, etc., these kinds of things. Very happy to prescribe for them in those circumstances, but with medical cannabis, there's still this scary kind of arena. So we need to educate. We definitely need to, build upon what Rowan was saying about introducing it into medical school. I mean, beyond just teaching about medical cannabis, the fact that the endocannabinoid system is something that I had to learn about, 15 years into my life as being a doctor is just is crazy as far as I'm concerned. So education for GPs, education for other doctors, and just really having, champions within the medical field and having that research that they can call upon will really, I think, just help to improve some of the skepticism that we see.
And I think just because we've got Rowan on the panel who's a medical student, it'd be interesting to hear if anything has sort of changed around education around the endocannabinoid system, because we know that's not taught in medical school. So what's been your experience? Have you had any training on that, or?
No.
No.
No is the honest answer for that. But there are positives to be taken from that. I think because of the gap in the education there, and medical education is hard. You do 5 years at medical school before you start your foundation training, and then many more years after that to get to someone like Louisa's level as a senior consultant. And within them 5 years, it's very condensed. There's an awful lot of material in there, and medical schools aren't that flexible. So if you say we want to add a new module, we want to teach our doctors of the future about the endocannabinoid system, it doesn't really just slot into medical education. So that's why through groups like the MCCS and Drug Science, we are putting a lot of work into organising extracurricular teaching for medical students. So actually Louisa's been kind enough to come up to my university at Birmingham in a few weeks' time, where Drug Science are organising a lecture there designed targeted at students to give an introduction to medical cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, looking at different areas of medical cannabis and where it can be used. So I think from the gap that is very blatantly there in the base medical education for our future doctors, we are now creating extracurricular opportunities for students that are interested to start accessing that teaching, which I think is the first step towards it becoming part of our overall syllabus, but we've still got a long way to go for that.
And is there many sort of doctors or sort of training medical students that are interested in this among your sort of peers?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a hot topic, especially with the recent developments in psychedelics. Both psychedelics and medical cannabis are very hot topics among medical students. And when we do these lecture evenings, so we've got one at Birmingham, there's one coming up in York, at Bath as well, they're incredibly well attended, they're really popular. Students want to learn about this sort of stuff, but it's going to be very hard sometimes to actually both access the resources to be able to do it, and sometimes even knowing where to look. So having organisations like Drug Science, like the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, that provide these resources, provide these lecture evenings or online webinars for people that don't attend any of these universities, has been really valuable. They're very well attended, and there is a lot of interest there amongst the student body to learn more.
Okay, that's promising. And in terms of sort of, you know, we have seen, I'm just going to open this up to everyone now, so feel free to jump in, but we have seen sort of 2 patients have the prescription reimbursed through the NHS this year. So are we at risk of sort of another postcode lottery situation where it depends on where you're at, and, you know, like we see with licensed cannabis medicines?
Oh, 100%. So, you know, I am aware of one of those patients, and you know, the work that they had to put in order to get the right documentation, get the support, get the letters. You know, if you're a patient, you know, perhaps you're too unwell to go through that process, it's too stressful, you're just physically not able, you don't have the resources, you don't have someone backing you to support you who's very passionate about it, like it shouldn't have had to be that hard.
Yeah, and if we're sort of, I guess, looking forward to kind of what we might want to change, Helen, from your sort of drug policy background, is there a sort of an easy or a quick fix? Like, what could we change within the policy that would make this, I'm sure there isn't, but that would make this easier, or kind of, you know, it just seems like there's so many barriers at the moment, and the legislation just doesn't allow for GPs to prescribe, for example. What could we change?
I think in terms of when we look at what we can change, looking at what the patients have told us, what we can change is the way that people experience being prescribed cannabis right now. So the people who have been able to access what is obviously in the main are private prescriptions. Those people are still, it sounds like, oh, well, then we're sorted because we've got the prescription, but they're still undergoing so much stress on top of their condition or on top of caring for someone who is, because they've then got to find the money for that prescription, which of course is one thing. But on the other side of it, in terms of their day-to-day life and what they're having to deal with, what we could change right now is the way that GPs, for example, react to people when they say that they have got a private prescription. So GPs across the patients that we spoke to ranged between actively obstructive and absolutely unwilling to let go of the language of prohibition, telling people that their medication was illegal, all sorts of incorrect, just not factual messages. And really quite destroying messages when you're someone who's had to battle to get that prescription and find the money to pay for it. But then they range through to GPs who, exactly as Rowan was saying, there are people who are really interested, who really, they wanted to see the people's products. They were like, can we look at it? Tell me what it's done for you. Oh my God, if it's done that for you, what could it do for our other patients? They really wanted to invest and engage with this. So there is will out there with a lot of people. But for the doctors who are not, who are peddling incorrect information, who are still treating people really badly because of their prescription, that's not okay, and that stigma is rooted in prohibition. So if you wanted one quick fix, maybe we could have a little look at 50-year-old drug laws that have been damaging the country for a very long time. So that would be a first point. And secondly, in terms of course, you know, we can do some stuff around GP training. We are very fortunate that where Lindsay and I work, there is a policing school. So they have been told that we will be coming in for some conversations with their young policing recruits, because one of the things that also was really destroying was hearing people not being able to just live their normal lives. It's bad enough when When you finally manage to leave your home because you have found a drug that treats your condition enough to let you live what should be a normal life, and you get outside your front door and then you're terrified that you are going to be confronted by a police officer who's not been trained appropriately, that's not okay either. And the horrible, horrible stories of people who'd got over like PTSD and been able to leave their house for the first time in years, and then had ended up pretty much agoraphobic because they'd gone for the first time to a music festival and a police officer had taken their medication off them and had terrified them. Those sort of things are not okay, and those are the things that we feel need to change. Those are the things that we can change right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Saying is I would really like to see some better scrutiny and regulation over the companies that make the medical cannabis. I am just so frustrated month on month alongside my patients when companies discontinue a line that was useful to particular patients, or it goes out of stock for several months on end with no information about when it's going to be back, or they just change the formulations completely. If there was any other medicine that this occurred with, we'd be up in arms. There'd be, MPs having questions, and it just wouldn't fly. So I'd really like to see some sort of tightening down on monitoring what they're doing and kind of holding them to account as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I think kind of, Adrian, you touched on before the sort of irradiated products, and there is issues with quality and sort of supply, and what are the sort of, just to feedback the experiences that you get from your members, what does progress look like for them, sort of beyond NHS access? What else do they want to see?
It's slow progress. They want to see it a lot quicker. The access it's restricted. Again, they don't see anywhere else that they can go to for help other than us. They want to see more places like us, similar to us, more acceptance, definitely, across the board. It's so devastating to still be hearing stories of people who can't leave with this medicine that they've campaigned for so long and struggled for, and then you get then pushed back into the door, and that's the one thing that they want is acceptance from everybody, and a little bit more freedom, if you get me, if that's a word.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think a lot of your members are potentially vulnerable people, and that's why the sort of service that you provide is so crucial. But this, I think, and as we were talking about on the last panel, the burden is placed on the patient to sort of be continuously fighting for just the right to consume their medication. And it's a lot when you've got a chronic condition, you're already managing and fighting with that. So yeah, I think sort of looking at what the future of cannabis medicine looks like in the UK, just to open this up to everyone, what do you think we need to change? Do we think that the current model is working? I mean, and just Luisa, to go to you, we've got this sort of a lot of standalone cannabis clinics at the moment. The Georgia Emerson Centre takes a slightly different approach. Do you think we need to go down more that avenue?
I think there definitely needs to be a standardisation. I think patient experience of the different clinics can be sort of like night and day. And I think that there needs to be better scrutiny. So there can be, some in the industry who are a little bit, I would say, free and easy with their prescriptions and perhaps minimise the potential risks. And, some don't believe that there are things like cannabis dependent, say, for example. And then at the opposite end of the spectrum, very, very restrictive, refusing patients that really could be helped. And I think it comes from just that kind of lack of standardisation with regards to treatment frameworks. There's no treatment model for medical cannabis. I've had to learn through experience, learn a lot from my patients actually, about what works for them and what doesn't, and then try to understand that so that I can apply it in practice. And there are a lot of doctors still who, when they come to the medical forums to talk to other doctors who are more experienced, they feel very lost, and they're medical cannabis prescribers. These are not, people outside of the industry. So I think it's down to more experienced doctors really putting themselves out there, putting themselves forward and trying to formulate and get it down onto paper in a way that we can disseminate to our younger colleagues, as it were, to kind of give them guidance and give them that confidence. And then I think it will only improve patient outcomes and patient experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important that, we talk a lot about how we fit cannabis into this conventional medicine model, but, I think traditional healthcare can learn a lot from the approach that doctors take with cannabis, this sort of holistic approach. Rowan, what are your thoughts on that, and what do you think sort of conventional medicine can take from that?
So, medicine is now designed to be taught. So in theory, it should be taught that patient-centred care and the holistic approach is the right way to go. I think if you were to ask me in practice, is that the way that medicine is taught? I'd probably say not in all areas. In some areas, better than others, perhaps. I think in my experience with having had the privilege of being able to sit in and work with a number of cannabis prescribers and cannabis clinicians, we're very fortunate that the approach from an awful lot of our prescribers within the UK is very patient-centred. And I feel that actually that's a very important point for medical cannabis. I feel the medical part of that is sometimes a little bit overlooked. My personal opinion is medical cannabis is a medicine. There is a role for a clinician and the MDT, the wider team there, both in the nursing and the pharmacy staff as well. It isn't just a matter of giving people flour and seeing how they get on, and that's all we do, and we wipe our hands of it and take the money and go home and enjoy our yachts and our cruises and all these sorts of things. I don't think the medical cannabis doctors are really like that. A lot of people do this work because they really care about the patient population. They know what the demand for this is like, and they see this as a route for people to become better holistically. And with our greater understanding of both the roles of THC, CBD, the terpene profiles, and the minor cannabinoids as well, the role of the clinician, I think, is becoming more and more important. So whilst conventional medicine can definitely learn a lot from cannabis, I do feel that actually cannabis can learn a little bit from conventional medicine too, in the approach that there is a reason that clinicians spend years learning about this stuff. And to briefly touch on the fact Louisa made the point of saying it's been very challenging for clinicians in recent years to become competent prescribers. There's been no manual or guide. The MCCS have actually been working on what we believe is the first standardised cannabis dosing handbook with Dr. Evan Lewis in North America. We're very excited about that publication. We think it's going to form an integral part of prescriber education. So rather than prescribers having to go in blind, as it were, and then learn from there, having a standardised approach that they can work from, as again we see in other aspects of conventional medicine, I think is going to be really beneficial for the prescribing community.
Absolutely. Is that something that you would like to see as well, Louisa?
100%. I think it will be invaluable, and I think it will help kind of just standardise treatment a little bit more across the industry, so it's a little bit less of a lottery, I think, in terms of the quality of care that you get from your clinic.
It's interesting, and it kind of brings me on, this might be a bit of a controversial point now, but a lot of patients would like to see a sort of grow your own sort of prescription model where, they could grow their medicine at home. In a lot of countries that have legalising cannabis now, you are allowed to grow up to sort of 4 plants at home. What are the panel's feelings on that, as a sort of in a prescription sense, I guess?
I think just given where we are now and the current state of scepticism, I think it would be hard to get that through at this stage. I think it's something that we should definitely try to work towards. A lot of patients are experts, they know what they're doing. I guess the only reservation I have is that when you remove the doctor, as it were, there's no monitoring, there's no consideration over safety, there's no consideration over looking out for early warning signs that maybe some mental health issue is developing. So you take that out of the equation, which I think could be a little bit risky, given that there are risks, definitely, especially with higher and higher levels of THC. And by having a medical professional that you can just at least talk to and temper some of those concerns or questions you might have, I don't think I'd like to see that removed from it completely.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. You don't want to remove the doctor or that sort of supervisory level. But yeah, I would definitely be campaigning for people to be able to grow their own medicine. That's basically, I see it as a right again. You're gonna, I mean, you can grow your own fruit, you can grow your own veg, but it's pushed through you, yeah. But the veg that we buy from a supermarket is now genetically modified so much that doesn't resemble the original plant that came from. So like, you're removing that nature away from us again. Again, we've mentioned the endocannabinoid system. These plants, these components have been in our system, in our makeup for generations, and it's been eradicated now. So I would definitely like us to be able to at least grow our own. Maybe 1-2 plants, again, you've got to regulate it in some way and have some supervision, but yeah, we need that access.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? I want to.
I think with my, probably with my drug lecturer's hat on, I would probably say that from a sociological perspective, I look at this from a harm perspective, like we take a semiology approach to this. And I think you have to start trying to measure harms against other harms. It's very easy to decontextualize these conversations, but if David Nutt was here, I'm fairly sure he would be saying that 2 of our most dangerous drugs are legal, and yet people don't have the right to grow a plant that for some people they would very much like to grow for themselves, to treat themselves, and that's not the way for everyone. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. I would like to think, of course, if that was going to happen, like you say, there needs to be some form of regulation, some form of people being able to have those conversations about what is harmful, what is safe, what's an appropriate amount, how can I do this safely. But I think while you've got prohibitionist law, those conversations can't open up. You shut down those conversations, you stop people from looking for help, you stop people looking for advice. One of the things that we found with our research was when we were talking to people, the amazing support that people find online in the cannabis community in terms of what can conventional medicine learn from the medical cannabis community, that support that people found, because some of them, what you were saying, Louise, about some of the clinics, some people were sent away with their cannabis and had absolutely no idea what to do with it, and were then like, who do I go to? And they went online, and this amazing community around them helped them. But if we're going to, if we're going to move forward, then what we need is some guidelines for people. If you're going to do this, people are going to do this and have been doing this for a very long time across a lot of countries. So if they are going to do this, how can we go about that? Can you help us? Can you tell us what to do this in a safe way?
Yeah.
I think, firstly, very, very supportive of what Adrian and the Teesside Cannabis Club do, what other groups like the UPA and Patient 11 do in terms of providing support for patients, in terms of the education and as a community and a network. So this is a big cultural thing with this. I think from a personal point of view, it is very hard to not support people being able to grow a small number of plants for personal consumption whilst medical cannabis is only realistically available through private prescription. I've had the privilege of meeting a lot of medical cannabis patients. I know you're not all millionaires, and the idea that everyone that needs medical cannabis is able to afford the relatively expensive private world that we're kind of stuck in now is of course absolutely absurd. And I can agree that people not having the legal right to produce their own medicine when they are unable to afford the only alternative that is available to them seems very wrong. So I can completely understand where the mood comes from for that. However, I would re-emphasise the point that Luisa has made, that we cannot cut out the role of the clinician within medical cannabis, both in terms of expertise and guidance, and also from a safety aspect as well. And you can't rival the experience and the research that clinicians both undertake and learn about in terms of what type of cannabis product or what preparation is best for you as a patient. I'm not saying that patients don't have a very good understanding of their own health and shouldn't be involved in part of the decision-making process of that, 'cause of course they should. But I wouldn't also expect a patient to have read the latest 10 research papers analysing different terpene profiles and which ones work best for different conditions, whereas I would expect your prescriber to have an understanding of those. And I think that for me is the massive role of the clinician that we can't forget is incredibly important.
Absolutely, yeah. We've spoken a lot today about different sort of product types and the sort of flower and the issues around flower with stigma and skepticism. Can you sort of envision a world where flower is widely prescribed on the NHS, or do you think it's just sort of too out there, just to anyone who wants to jump in?
No, I don't think it's too out there at all. I just think it needs a little bit of tweaking, let's say, and perhaps, first of all, I think the industry has done us a big disservice by the nicknames that a lot of the flower medication has. That just puts people off straight away. So, you know, sadly, have some more boring names for the flowers, and then have a treatment manual that people can refer to, and get patients talking to doctors as well. So they might not be able to, you know, accept it from me, but when they hear a transformative story, when they see somebody, you know, coming off of multiple medications. I mean, I don't know of any other medication where I can treat mental health, pain, chronic fatigue, post-viral, like all at the same time. I mean, I just think that's fantastic. So, yeah.
Does anyone else want to have any thoughts on the sort of flower on the NHS before we move on?
Personally, I absolutely think it's possible, it's achievable. It's a big part of the reason that we harp on so much about education, so that it can start to become a specialty within mainstream clinicians and within doctors within the NHS. Again, personal point of view, I do feel that it's a bit difficult to look at cannabis as just being one medicine. And this comes back to the thing again about there being so many varieties, but not just within THC and CBD levels or within the form of administration, but within the terpene profiles and the minor cannabinoids within the plant as well. And I think that's one of the real challenges about how difficult would it be to see a flower product within the BNF? Because there's so many different flower products. There's hundreds and hundreds of combinations in terms of the cannabinoids and the terpenes. So I feel that, yes, we can see it within the NHS, but not within our current framework of what drugs look like within our pharmacopoeia of prescribing, because I don't think cannabis, it's trying to fit a square peg into a round hole for that, and it's just not going to work.
Okay, thank you. Just to sort of wrap things up, I'm going to come to each of you and ask you, I guess, if you're in government for the day or if you were the health secretary, what's the one thing that you would want to change? Adrian. If you can stick to just one.
I'd just make it recreational straight away. So, yeah, probably the wrong person to ask. Thank you.
So I'd definitely invest in more research into it. Let's get that sort of scientific evidence behind it, so we can just, you know, knock those skeptics on the head, essentially.
I think I would get some good education and training programmes for GPs, for police officers, for any other professionals who are working with people, just to make sure that the people who are being prescribed today are treated differently and better.
Yeah, I think allowing GPs to prescribe would be a very short, easy one to do.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got some questions, I think, time for some questions from the audience, so if anybody wants to raise a hand.
So, given the stigma and inertia, at what point does civil disobedience become the only option?
2018, was it? Yeah.
Does anybody want? Yeah.
Sorry, I was reading the comments. So we've got a couple of questions. Obviously, communication needs to improve between doctors and pharmacies. What can be done to improve this? And also linked, there's a feeling that the industry would improve if patient feedback didn't fall on deaf ears. Where is the best place to be listened to? So there's a question about being listened to, and there's a question about how we improve these lines of communication and education between producers, pharmacies, and prescribing clinicians, doctors.
Communication between pharmacies is going to get a lot better now that they are going to allow electronic prescriptions. that's just going to speed things up and make things so much easier. So it's going to be down to individual clinics now to adopt that.
What was the other question? Sorry, I couldn't quite catch that.
In terms of patient feedback, how do patients feedback? Because there's a general feeling, well, from the commenter, the industry would improve if patient feedback didn't fall on deaf ears, get filed in a black hole, and patients were listened to. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine how frustrating it must be being a medical cannabis patient in the society that we're in now. I mean, I think within your healthcare that you have available to you, there are just so many closed doors. The amount of stories that we've just heard today of people approaching their general practitioners and either being laughed at or being ignored is a bit heartbreaking, actually. So I can understand if I was in your position, I probably wouldn't want to go and talk to my regular physician about it. I feel from a personal point of view, what we do, the Medical Cannabis Clinician Society is a resource for non-expert clinicians, so non-cannabis prescribers, who want to learn more about medical cannabis. I would advise all patients who are trying to talk to their GP to signpost them towards the MCCS. We have lots of resources on there for clinicians. So when you're giving feedback, when you want to talk to clinicians who aren't experts, you at least have resources that you can signpost them towards, so they've got no excuse, ideally, about not knowing enough about medical cannabis to be able to address your concerns or be able to hear your feedback.
Hi, very quick question. The medical cannabis that is grown in the UK that is exported and not used in this country, what educational measures are you taking to inform GPs and patients that there is actually medical grade cannabis grown in this country that is shipped offshore and never used here?
It's commonplace, it's common knowledge for most of our members that happens. It's another one of those things that we should all be outraged as. It's, like you say, we're one of the biggest exporters of it, and 5 years on from actually changing the law, we're still sat here having the same conversation. Like, yeah, we have these conversations every day. These are the difficult conversations that we have and that we've been set up to handle. You've got to have it with everybody, though. Even the people who aren't receptive to it, you've just got to say, do you know that it's legal? Do you know that medical cannabis is legal? Do you know that we're one of the biggest exporters in the world of it? I mean, again, most of the flower that we get, the medical patients, isn't even grown here. So it's imported, and we've got no industry here, which we should be starting for the growers, for the industry, and again, setting regulations. So like you say, if you're going to have one certain strain that helps people, then have a program that keeps it in line for so many years or whatever. You need that in place. We're falling behind so much here, but yeah, it's a great start.
Need to be better at collaborating to essentially provide those kind of multidisciplinary team forums for, you know, cannabis prescribers and non-cannabis prescribers to attend. They should be more actively, you know, going out there to GPs to provide them with CPD events in universities. And at the moment, sadly, you know, there are some clinics that are very collaborative and very much, you know, about information sharing, and then there are others that are just, you know, it's a business where you're our competitor. So, yeah, I'd like to see clinics being more collaborative, definitely, and disseminating such messages.
Sort of a personal question for the doctors. Given the recent publication of by I think it's David Nutt, Robert Carhart Harris, and a couple of the other guys at Imperial about how the 5-HT 2A neuroreceptor is involved in neuroplasticity and whatnot. I wondered if any of that study has informed us on the effect of antidepressants and SSRIs and cannabis use together, and I wondered if that's changed anybody's opinions.
Gosh.
Sorry if that's too vague.
That was
I'm sorry.
a long question. No. I mean, I don't think that study is sort of like widely known, but I think, you know, just thinking about my patients and, you know, how they report their experience of medical cannabis, there's definitely some opening up of pathways that otherwise were shut down by like antidepressant medication. They often report feeling more able to accept, you know, negative thoughts that they've had, not feel so overwhelmed by them, kind of an ability to just kind of like take a step back from the emotional content of what they're feeling and thinking and just get a breath from it and get a breather from it. And then without the, you know, depersonalizing, personality stripping aspects of so many of these antidepressants, yes, okay, you feel okay on your antidepressant, but you don't feel like yourself. I've not had a single medical cannabis patient come to me and say, oh, you know, I started that medication and my personality was gone and my joy was gone. So, yeah, I think there is definitely something there that needs to be looked at with regards to the mechanisms of medical cannabis, like what is it actually doing to our brain functioning and the pathways in our brain that gives such positive benefits from a mental health perspective particularly.
We've got any other questions? Yeah. I've got a question for everyone on the panel. Can you talk about one positive change that you hope to see in 5 years' time from now?
Free prescriptions for any patient that needs them.
I would just like to see a lot more prescriptions as well. It needs that. We need a more amount, a lot more people in the system, a lot more people using it, and we'll get recognised, definitely.
I think for me, I would step back and look at the bigger picture and look where there's been a lot of talk today about stigma and about the way that people are made to feel. And what we know from our research is looking across the globe at what happens when you change drug policy. Actually, if you haven't got prohibitionist policy, then those cannabis tropes that we talk about, where people assume that it's young people who want to get high for free and this, that, and the other, those tend to fall away when you have when you remove those prohibitionist laws. So that's what I would change.
And yeah, I think I'd like to see the legitimacy of cannabis medicine accepted within our medical field and integrated into our medical education for our doctors of tomorrow.
Brilliant, thank you. Have we got any other questions, or is it... No? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you to Mags and everyone who has done an amazing job organising.